She's made presidents sweat. She's extracted confessions from murderers. She's stared down dictators without blinking. She waits. She listens. She asks the question behind the question. And eventually, everyone breaks. Until Prince Harry. Until a Tuesday afternoon in Montecito, when the Duke of Sussex sat across from her in his carefully staged living room and treated every question like a personal insult. Until his condescension became so thick, his dismissiveness so complete, that Diane Sawyer, at 78 years old, after half a century of never backing down, did something no one had ever seen her do. She stopped. Not because of time constraints, not because of technical problems, because continuing had become pointless. The moment she closed her notebook and said, "I don't think this is working," those 6 words, delivered with the quiet dignity of someone who'd simply had enough, would become the most replayed clip of the year. But it was what Harry said next, the words that revealed everything, that made America finally understand what everyone around him had been dealing with for years. You're going to want to stay for every second of this one. If you're new here, join our community. We cover the moments everyone's talking about, and this one's already breaking the internet. Now, let's get into what really happened in that Montecito living room. The house was immaculate, the kind of carefully curated perfection that only exists when teams of people spend hours making everything look effortlessly casual. Fresh flowers in every sightline, books arranged by color rather than content, family photos positioned at angles that would catch the California light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Diane Sawyer had seen this kind of staging before. She'd interviewed enough celebrities and politicians to recognize when a space had been designed to communicate rather than to live in. But she didn't judge. Everyone performed in their own way. Her job was to find what lay beneath the performance. She arrived an hour early, walking through the space slowly, getting a feel for it. Her producer trailed behind with the usual pre-interview briefing. Prince Harry entered the room with an energy she recognized immediately. Coiled, defensive, ready for a fight that hadn't started yet. His handshake was perfunctory. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming all this way," he said. The words correct, but the warmth artificial. "Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful." "We like it." Not "thank you," not an elaboration, just "we like it." A wall, politely constructed. They settled into facing armchairs. The cameras began rolling. "Harry!" Diane's voice carried its signature quality. Warm, unhurried, genuinely curious. "Before we discuss anything specific, I want to know how you actually are. Not the prepared answer, the real one." "I'm good." "Good? Is there something wrong with good?" "Nothing at all. I'm just curious what good means for you right now. Peaceful? Busy? Content?" Harry's expression carried a flicker of impatience. "It means what it means. I'm not sure why we need to dissect a simple answer." Diane let the sharpness pass without acknowledgement. "Fair enough. Tell me about what you're working on. The foundation, the projects. What's consuming your energy these days?" "We're focused on meaningful work, mental health advocacy, supporting veterans, environmental initiatives through Archwell." "Can you give me something specific? An example of impact?" Harry recrossed his legs. "Impact isn't always reducible to sound bites." "I'm not asking for sound bites. I'm asking what success looks like for you." "Success looks like changed conversations, shifted paradigms. It's not always visible in ways that translate to news segments." "Help me see it in ways that do." Harry's eyes met hers with something that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't far from it. "Perhaps some things are too nuanced for that format." Diane absorbed the condescension without reaction. In 50 years, she'd been dismissed by people far more intimidating than a prince with a persecution complex. "I've interviewed Nobel laureates who managed to explain quantum physics in accessible terms. I have faith you can explain your foundation work." That feels like a false equivalence. It's an observation. When people say something can't be explained simply, it often means they haven't thought it through simply. Harry's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I haven't thought through my own work?" "I'm suggesting that explaining work clearly is part of doing it effectively. If you can't communicate what you're doing, the doing matters less." The atmosphere in the room had shifted. What was supposed to be a gentle conversation had developed edges. "Let's try a different direction," Diane said. "You've been in California for several years now. Has it become home?" "This is where we live." "But is it home? There's a difference between an address and belonging somewhere." "I belong with my family. Geography is secondary." "That's a lovely sentiment, but I'm curious about the practical reality. You grew up with deep roots in England, the military, the charities, the family connection. Do you ever miss that?" I miss what could have been, not what was. What could have been? A family that supported rather than sabotaged, an institution that protected rather than exposed, a press that reported rather than destroyed. Diane nodded slowly. Those are significant grievances. You've articulated them extensively. In the Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, your memoir. I'm wondering what's left to say. Harry's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It's a genuine question.
You've told your story comprehensively across multiple platforms. Is there a new chapter, or are we revisiting familiar ground? The truth requires repetition when lies persist. But at some point, repetition becomes its own form of stasis, doesn't it? You keep telling the same story and nothing changes. The family doesn't reconcile. The press doesn't relent. Maybe the strategy isn't working. Or maybe the forces against me are that entrenched. Or maybe there's a third option, which is that the story itself has become the obstacle, that dwelling in grievance prevents moving toward anything else. Harry stood up abruptly, then sat back down, the kind of false start that betrayed more agitation than he wanted to show. I'm not dwelling, I'm correcting the record. For 5 years? For as long as it takes. Takes to accomplish what? What's the end state? What does victory look like? Harry had no immediate answer.
Diane waited in the silence, her signature technique, the stillness that made people fill gaps with truth they hadn't meant to reveal. Victory looks like being understood. By whom? By everyone, by anyone. And will telling your story another time accomplish that? Or might doing something that speaks for itself be more effective? Let's talk about the Netflix projects, Diane said, shifting direction. Some were canceled, others didn't materialize. What happened? Harry's expression hardened. Projects evolve. That's entertainment. Evolve is diplomatic language for canceled. I'm asking what actually happened. I'm not going to discuss internal business negotiations. You discussed your family's financial arrangements quite specifically, what your father provided, when funding stopped. Why is Netflix different? Because those revelations served a purpose, which was helping people understand our situation.
And helping them understand the Netflix situation wouldn't serve a purpose? It would serve your story, not mine. Diane nodded. So you share information selectively based on whether it supports your narrative. Everyone does that. Not everyone claims to be seeking truth against forces of distortion. If you're genuinely transparent, be transparent about everything, not just things that make you sympathetic. Harry's face flushed. I've been more transparent than any royal in history. That's a low bar. The question is whether you've been transparent enough for someone positioning themselves as a truth teller. So far, the transparency seems strategic rather than comprehensive. You're twisting my intentions. I'm examining them. There's a difference. The Met Gala, Diane continued. You and Meghan weren't invited this year. Harry's composure cracked briefly. We weren't on the list. I assumed it was scheduling. Being excluded seems significant. Guest lists change. But you're presumably exactly the kind of high-profile couple the Met Gala would want. Not being invited feels like a statement. I don't control Anna Wintour's decisions. No, but you've built a narrative around institutional exclusion. The palace excluding you from events, Netflix canceling projects, the Met Gala not inviting you. Is there a pattern? They're separate incidents. Are they? From the outside, it looks like doors that were open are closing. The question is whether that's conspiracy or consequence. Meaning? Meaning maybe you're harder to work with than people expected. Maybe the combination of demands, restrictions, and grievances has made collaboration difficult. Harry's voice dropped dangerously. You don't know anything about how I work. I'm observing patterns. The observation could be wrong, but I've done enough interviews to recognize when someone has alienated their potential allies. I haven't alienated anyone. Your brother, your father, your extended family, Netflix executives apparently, Spotify, from reports. At what point do you examine the common factor? The common factor is a person trying to live authentically in systems designed to crush authenticity. Or the common factor is a person whose definition of authenticity requires everyone else to accommodate his narrative. The tension had become thick enough to touch. Diane remained completely calm, her decades of experience evident in her unshakable composure. Let's talk about Meghan. How is she? Every wall reinforced simultaneously. Harry's entire body language shifted. I prefer not to discuss my wife.
At all? At all. That's challenging, given that she's central to everything you've built. The foundation is joint. The Netflix deal was joint. Your public narrative is fundamentally coupled. I can speak for myself. Can you? Because most of your public statements involve her experience, her treatment, her perspective. Making her off-limits removes significant territory. Harry's jaw worked silently for a moment. There are rumors I should address. What rumors? The divorce speculation. It's fabricated. Our marriage is strong, stronger than ever. Diane's expression remained neutral. I didn't ask about divorce. You were going to. I wasn't. I asked how she's doing. You interpreted that as asking about divorce. That's revealing. It's defensive, because that's what the tabloids keep implying. I'm not a tabloid. I'm sitting in your living room asking how your wife is handling things. Your first association was divorce denial. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That divorce is on your mind more than you're admitting. People don't defend against accusations that aren't close to home. Harry's face went pale. That's completely unfair. Is it? I asked a simple question. You heard a threat. The gap between my question and your interpretation is significant. Because I know how these things work. You know how tabloid coverage works. This isn't tabloid coverage. This is me, in your home, asking you a direct question. If you can't distinguish between enemies and people simply doing their jobs, you've lost something important. Harry stood and walked to the window, a movement that felt like retreat disguised as contemplation. You don't understand the pressure. I've interviewed people under more pressure than you can imagine. War criminals, survivors of genocide, parents whose children were murdered. Almost all of them managed to engage with questions without treating me as an adversary. Their situations were different. Were they? Pressure is pressure. Scrutiny is scrutiny. What differs is how people respond. You've chosen defensiveness and hostility. That's a choice, Harry, not an inevitability. Easy for you to say from behind a camera. I've spent 50 years in front of cameras too. I know what scrutiny feels like. The difference is I don't make scrutiny the center of my identity. I do work. The work speaks. People can think what they want. That's because your work is respected. My work wasn't always respected. I earned that respect over decades by doing the work rather than complaining about how the work was received. You're 3 years into your post-royal chapter and already positioned as a victim of forces you can't control. That's not inspiring. That's exhausting. Harry turned back to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed. I want to be known for my work. Then do work worth knowing. So far, what you're known for is your grievances. Your book was about grievances. Your documentary was about grievances. Your interviews circle the same complaints. Where's the work that exists independently of your suffering? The foundation, which you can't describe specifically, which has no documented outcomes you can cite, which seems to exist primarily as a vehicle for your continued public presence rather than actual change. Something cracked in Harry's expression. Not the vulnerability Diane might have hoped for, but something harder. You're like everyone else. You've decided who I am. I haven't decided anything. I've asked questions. You've answered some with deflection, others with hostility. The picture emerging is your creation, not mine. The picture is distorted. By whom? I'm literally sitting here asking you about your life and work, and you've treated every question as an attack. If everyone who asks questions is attacking, maybe examine why questions feel like weapons. Because they're used as weapons. Sometimes, not always, not today. Today, questions are just questions. Your defensiveness is yours. Harry grabbed his water glass, drank deeply, set it down too hard. I came here wanting to discuss my foundation work, my vision, what we're building. I've asked about all those things. You've given me generalities and deflections. When I pushed for specifics, you accused me of simplifying. When I noted patterns, you accused me of distortion. At some point, the problem isn't my questions. So what is the problem in your expert opinion? The problem is you're asking to be understood while making understanding impossible. You want sympathy without offering access. You want support without accepting scrutiny. Those things don't coexist. Diane closed her notebook, a gesture so unusual in her career that even her crew noticed. Harry, I'm going to be honest with you. You haven't been already? I've been professional. Now I'm going to be direct. She set the notebook aside entirely. I've done this for 50 years. I've interviewed people in genuine crisis, people whose suffering made yours look like a paper cut. Almost all of them, even in their worst moments, could engage with questions, could find common ground.
could recognize that a journalist asking questions isn't the same as an enemy attacking. You don't understand my specific. I understand that you've built a prison out of grievance and called it a palace. I understand that everyone who doesn't accept your narrative becomes part of the conspiracy against you. I understand that you're so defended against being hurt that you've made genuine connection impossible. That's amateur psychology. It's observation. 50 years of watching people has taught me to recognize when someone is truly persecuted and when someone has chosen persecution as an identity. You're in the second category. That's not judgment, it's description. Harry's face contorted. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. You can walk out. You can add me to the list of people who didn't understand. You can keep the narrative intact, but nothing will change. You'll still be angry, still defending, still fighting battles that might have ended years ago if you'd stopped fueling them. Diane looked directly into the camera. I don't think this is working. The words hung in the air. Harry stood frozen, seemingly unable to process that an interview was ending because of him rather than for him. What do you mean? I mean that I came here hoping for genuine conversation. What I've gotten is defensiveness, hostility, and an unwillingness to engage with anything that doesn't support your predetermined narrative. That's not conversation. That's performance. I haven't been performing. You've done nothing but perform. The aggrieved prince, the misunderstood exile, the truth-teller everyone refuses to hear. It's a well-rehearsed role, but it's still a role. This is who I am. Is it? Or is it who you've become because being a victim is easier than being accountable? I don't know. I was trying to find out. You wouldn't let me. She turned back to Harry, her expression carrying something that might have been compassion, might have been disappointment. I'm going to end this interview now, not because of time, not because of anything you've revealed nothing, but because continuing serves no purpose when one person wants conversation and the other wants validation. That's not fair. I think it's completely fair. I've given you every opportunity to show me something real. You've shown me walls. I can't work with walls. She stood up slowly, gathering her materials with the deliberate movements of someone who'd made a final decision. I hope you find what you're looking for, Harry. I genuinely do. But I don't think you'll find it through more interviews, more complaints, more elaborate defenses against criticism that sometimes might just be truth. What truth? That some of this is your doing. That grievance isn't a strategy. That the world isn't as against you as you've convinced yourself it is. Harry's voice dropped to something cold. You'll regret this. I've never regretted honesty. I'm not going to start now. She walked toward the door, then paused. The cameras have captured everything. What airs will be what happened. Not a manipulation, not a distortion, just two people who couldn't connect because one of them wouldn't allow it. She left. Her crew followed. Harry stood alone in his carefully staged living room, surrounded by perfect flowers and arranged books, in a silence that felt larger than the space. Diane addressed it briefly in a subsequent interview. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've talked to people whose circumstances would break most of us, and they engaged, they tried, they met me halfway. What happened in Montecito was different. I encountered someone so convinced of his own persecution that any question became evidence of conspiracy. That's not something I can work with. That's not something anyone can work with. Do you think he's capable of change? Everyone's capable of change. The question is whether they want to. From what I observed, he wants validation, not change. He wants the world to accept his narrative without question. When it doesn't, everyone who questions becomes the enemy. That's a lonely way to live. Would you interview him again? If something changed, yes. If he came to me ready for actual conversation rather than performance. But that would require him to see that conversation is possible, that not everyone asking questions is attacking, that scrutiny isn't destruction, that the people reaching toward him aren't all threats. She paused. I hope he finds that. I hope someone gets through. It just wasn't going to be me. Not that day. The interview lasted 17 minutes. Its impact lasted much longer. For Diane Sawyer, it became another chapter in a legendary career. Proof that even after 50 years, she could still recognize when conversation was impossible and have the integrity to stop rather than pretend. For Prince Harry, it was another entry in a growing catalog of interviews gone wrong. Another journalist who didn't understand. Another member of the media proving what he already believed. But for viewers watching closely, it was something else. A window into someone so defended that even the most patient interviewer couldn't reach him. Someone whose walls had become so high that they'd stopped being protection and become imprisonment. Diane had tried, Harry couldn't let her in,
And in the end, maybe that was the only story there was. A man so convinced the world was against him that he couldn't recognize when it wasn't. What do you think? Was Diane right to end the interview, or should she have tried longer? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story hit different, here's how to stay connected. Tap that subscribe button and join the thousands who never miss a moment. Ring the notification bell